welcome to In the Zone. I'm Craig Zimmerman, and with us today in the Zone number 37, we've got retired educator Eric Longuski. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Craig. Good to see you.
So, as I've told everybody, there is no secret questions. There's nothing that's going to stump you. You and I go way back from the days that my kids were in Rain City High School.
That's right.
And it seems like yesterday, but it's quite some time ago.
Time flies.
Yeah. So I know some of the answers to these questions, and you know what they are too, but you were born and raised a little bit north of here in a farming community.
That's correct. I was born in Marlette, but raised in Peck, Michigan my entire life. And it's interesting because I actually worked on a dairy farm, and that was the only job I could get back in the day, and so I had quite a few stories from that particular 5 years of my life that I was able to take and incorporate later in my life. And my parents grew up on dairy farms as well, so we had the same kind of background. We could talk about things.
Yep. So now, growing up in Peck, did you live in the township or in the city of Peck?
I was actually a city kid. I lived right in the town of Peck, and so our backyard was the country, but yeah, I was in town. I was a walker to school.
Roughly speaking, what would be the population of Peck? I have no idea.
I believe right now, even back then, it's like 600 to 700 people in the town of Peck. Small class day school. You know, 42 kids in a class, 45 kids in a grade, that kind of thing.
And you went to school with Dave Seddon, or a few years behind him?
I was a few years behind Dave Seddon, yes, but exactly. The Seddon family, great family from Peck, Michigan. Dave was older than I was, but yeah, quite an athlete. We went and watched him play when I was a young kid.
Okay. So family, mother, father, siblings?
Yes, I have. My mother and father both passed away. My dad, Marvin, my mother, Mariana, she passed away a few years ago. But they're both passed, but they had quite an impact, of course, as everybody's parents do. And then I have my brother, Andy, and my sister, Vicky. We're still awfully close. They don't live around here. They moved out. Brother lives in Midland. Sister lives up in Coleman, but I'm still a close family. We see each other quite a bit.
Was your father a farmer?
He grew up on a dairy farm, in the old school dairy farms, where the house he grew up in, even though he was born in 41, no indoor plumbing until he was like 15 years old. And so he had it pretty rough that way, but he grew up on a farm. So my mother. They both worked in dairy farms until they went off to school or got married.
Okay. And so you went to Peck High School?
Yes.
And roughly speaking, 60, 80 kids in your class?
Oh, no. Like, I graduated, it's hard to tell, like 42 or 43 kids. And that's by the time we got to at one point in time, I believe we were in the 50s, but by the time we graduated, we were down into the mid 40s, I guess. It's hard to tell the exact number. We never really were told.
Well, I agree with you. Back in my day, you never talked about that type of thing.
Right.
So then you went out to college. Where did you go to school?
Well, my dad, the reason I ended up in Peck, his dad was a teacher in Peck and the principal, and he moved to SC4 just as I started school in kindergarten. And so, of course, I'd go to school at St. Clair County Community College. So I went there for 2 years and had a couple classes with my dad, which was interesting. You know, when you're used to calling a teacher Mr. Tubbs or Mr. Pearson, it's Dad. And so that was unique. He was a good teacher. And then I went to Michigan State.
What did your dad teach?
He taught soils, he taught crops and soils, he taught forestry, he taught all kinds of ag type classes.
So from SC4 you go on to 4-year college?
Yep, Michigan State University, go green. So, and it was where Dad went as well. And so it was one of those things where I thought about Central, Michigan State, Lake Superior State, but you're raised in a home with a Spartan. It kind of happens.
Sure. Okay. And what did you major there then?
In science. And biology was my actual degree, physical science minor. And it was always interesting to me that when you major in biology, it's just a broad category. There's so many different courses that fall under that umbrella of biology. It was one of the first things I learned going to college. There's a lot out there. But yeah, it was a biology degree.
And so then you graduate in 4 years?
Well,
or 5?
Well, as fast as I could, because you had a student teach to be a teacher. I had a student teach for 1 semester, so I was out in 4 years and then 1 term, because back then Michigan State was on a term schedule. And so I had to go fall term, and then I was done, and I could go substitute teach and so on.
Where was your first job?
My first job that made an impact was in Yale, Michigan. I was a sub there, and I worked with some great guys. Like you already mentioned, one, Dave Seddon was there, Don Smesnick, Sandy Rutledge. It was a really unique situation at the time. But I subbed there for like 5 months. And then my first real job was in Marlette, Michigan, and taught there for 3 years before I landed the job in East China.
What did you teach in Marlette?
Biology and chemistry.
So it's the same thing that you taught in East China?
Exactly. Yep. And environmental science at East China, or physics 1 year and things like that. But for the most part, yeah.
And you coached high school baseball for a number of years?
Yeah, that started at Marlette. And
Okay.
I know I've seen some interviews before with like Coach Bob and so on. Coaching wasn't in my future. I didn't really plan on that, but in a small school, they want
Sure.
you to.
Yep.
And so they asked me if I wanted to coach football and baseball. Well, when you got a teaching job back in the 90s, the early 90s, you did what
Right.
you had to do. And fortunately, I landed with some great people. Baseball became the one I pursued the most. I worked with a guy named Fred Mrozak, just a fundamental coach, and he was the exact right person for a guy who didn't know much about baseball to work with. And so started there. Then, of course, you come to East China, and now you have a little bit of a knowledge base, and you keep going.
Okay. So when do you think that you decided to be a teacher? Was it young, when you were very, very young, because your parents were teachers?
You know, well, my mom was actually a nurse, and she was a stay-at-home mom until I was like 12, but Dad really instilled that. I always enjoyed the outdoors, sciences. I mean, like a lot of kids thought about being a wildlife biologist, being an officer, that kind of thing. But then I realized that to get a job, I had to incorporate something with sciences, and so then I decided during high school that pursuing an education field would make sense. And I could, you know, I had a bunch of teachers that were amazing in the sciences, and so I wanted to, you know, do the same thing. So probably high school.
Okay. Okay. So you come to East China roughly what year?
1994.
Okay. And did you always teach one or two of the same classes, or was there, you know, a half dozen different
Yeah,
things?
generally I taught a biology-related course, whether it be biology 1 or biology 2, genetics, but they all fell under that umbrella, or a physical science class, but most of the time it was a strict biology, and then, or genetics and then chemistry.
Okay.
So all the way through, so
So you were there over 20 years.
yeah,
Okay.
22 years.
And so now you run into kids that are adults with children.
Yeah, it's the best. I
Yeah.
mean, when you run into those kids after all this time, I guess, kind of take a little sidetrack here, I talk to a lot of guys that have their own businesses or they're farmers and things
Sure.
like this, and we talk about, you know, what our jobs are like, and I didn't realize at the time what a blessing it was to be around so many, you know, young kids that were great kids and a great staff.
Sure.
The interactions you get with so many people, and after all these years, now you come in and bump into those students, and you have like all these people you know, and you want to know how they're doing and how their lives have, you know, turned out, and it's just an awesome feeling. Where a lot of people don't have that, and I took it
Right.
for granted back then that I had all these people around me that were exceptional people, and so now I appreciate it more that I'm no longer in the field, but it's something to reflect back on.
I had somebody tell me yesterday that you were a driver's ed teacher for my son as well.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. I did that for actually more years than I taught. I started doing driver ed before I actually had my first teaching job.
Okay.
And so there are a few stories that came out of that as well, you know.
It's good to have that break on the one side.
Oh, you're brave. The break makes all the difference. I feel sorry for parents that teach their own kids how to drive and don't have that break.
Right.
With the break, you can do about anything. Without the break, I mean, you can't touch it.
Right.
It's scary. You know?
Right. So you taught driver's ed for a number of years then?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And that was that in East China? You did both Marine City and St. Clair?
Yeah, you had the mixture of kids.
Yeah.
And so I got to know kids from, you know, the St. Clair area. Even though I was a full-time Marine City person,
Sure.
you get to know them all. So it was nice. It was a good community kind of feel.
I talked to Dave Ostrin because Dave has now gone from teaching driver's ed to doing the testing at the end. And he does those by large numbers.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
That'd be scary because, again,
Yeah.
when you're testing, you're driving their car and
Yes.
you're along for the ride and you hope they've got their practice in. You know?
Yep. Yep. So tell me about Mrs. Longuski. Where did you meet her along the way?
Well, she grew up in Sandusky.
Okay.
And Marine City and Sandusky are very similar. Peck is Marine City and Peck and St. Clair and Sandusky are very similar. And so we'd go up to Sandusky to hang out, you know, the higher end kind of town. And I met my wife there a few times. And by pure chance, we both went to SC4 together.
Okay.
And I was fortunate enough to somehow, you know, hang out with her a little bit, and we kind of fell for each other, and the rest is kind of history. But yeah, she was a Sandusky person. Her mom still lives up in Sandusky where she originally grew up, and so I
Okay.
still have a connection with the Thumb area quite a bit.
Does your wife work?
Yes. She's a Port Huron teacher, and to be honest, does an incredible job. She's dealt with special needs students or special education students, mostly PO-high students for the first 20-some years of her career, physically handicapped or health impaired in some way. And now she's doing special education, but she's been at it almost 30 years. She could retire anytime. But she loves kids and still wants to keep doing it, and so
Well, I've said to
know.
many people just in a discussion about when is the right time, when you decide, right?
exactly.
You know,
exactly.
if she likes it, enjoys it, continue.
Yeah, and it gives her heart into the job, and I sometimes look at it like, you're taking on an awful lot of stress, but it's just who she is, and so she does a very nice job with that, so I'm proud of her.
Your mentors.
There was a bunch of them. I mean, you can go back to, obviously your parents. My dad was my number one, and he always set an example, and he instilled, all kinds of values in us, and most of them good. I mean, not all. And so you learn from them, and then a lot of teachers you had. They formed that perception of, right and wrong and things you should do. Co-workers, the bosses you used to work for, you don't think that makes much of a difference at the time until later on. My employer at Barber Farms, John and Denny Barber, you learned a lot from them.
Sure.
And so every person I've been associated with has been kind of a mentor, but some of the best, I mean, like I think a lot of people would say the same thing, Bob Siskavich. I mean, that guy right there was one of those that was really a mentor. Guys like Paul Dimmer, Ryan Glodich, Marianne Wines, science teachers at Marine City, and coaches as well. Very important people, I mean, to work with, even though even your same age.
Sure.
You can look to them for advice and good ideas because they're exceptional people. And again, when you start naming names, you always feel bad because
you miss somebody.
Yep. But all throughout it, and of course, like I say, from teachers you had to the people you worked with, they all make an impact. When you're young, everybody makes an impact.
Sort of like everything adds up.
It does.
Yeah.
Everybody. Like the old the farmer that retired that would come back and visit his sons when I was working at Barber Farms. You could listen to him because he'd been around a few years and he had some things, and if you listened, you learned. But you have to open your mind up and listen a little bit.
So now you're sort of the guy, you're the elder statesman now.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of these groups.
Craig, it happens to us fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to believe how quickly you flip around,
Yep.
And that's the thing that you would sometimes take for granted as a teacher. Sometimes you said some things that made a difference, and you had to be careful what you said.
Sure.
Your beliefs to make sure that you were saying, I'm a little biased on this, and because it's not your job to influence them, you just
Right.
want to let them know who you are and kind of explain why. That was always fun, though.
So let's step back to your coaching days. You coach baseball.
Yes.
Baseball tends to be one of those methodical sports where you've got, some of the golden rules of what you do, when you do them, how you do them. Runner on first, bunt him to second, things like that.
Yes.
Give me some of your best memories of coaching baseball.
Well, to begin, I mean, it was so new when I was working with Fred Morozak and Marlette. Everything kind of sticks in your mind, and remember all those days. But it's kind of hard to say this incident over that one.
Sure.
But I can think of one. But then I went through Marine City as a JV coach. I followed Ron Glodich and coached there for years. I got the varsity job at Marine City, and I was there for 3 years, which seemed longer than that, because a varsity coach versus a JV coach is night and day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you hear a lot of positive things as a JV coach, and a varsity coach is a lightning rod, as every varsity coach knows. But I was working with Ryan Felix, and he is an incredible assistant coach. I mean, the guy is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to baseball. And we had a game against St. Clair, and we had just lost a very good player from Marine City to St. Clair, and our team was we were overmatched. This team from Coach Malowitz was an amazing coach at St. Clair and a bunch of talent. And we beat St. Clair. We had a boy who was batting right around 100. Great kid. Hits a home run off. Brad Seddon, who's a Division I Michigan athlete.
What's the chances, right?
Exactly. Over the left field fence at Marine City. We win the game 3-2, and it was like an improbable one. We play St. Clair that year 10 times. We lose 9.
Right.
And so those kind of things stick with you. But just the kids you watch grow up, and you're in the dugout together. It's different than a teacher. Coaches and teachers have a different relationship. You can talk differently.
Right.
But there's so many, to be honest. But that was one of those that stuck out as a moment you just, that would be one.
Right. Everybody has some of those, whether it's playing, whether it's coaching, and you may have had some playing as well. You can. I always say you can't remember what you had for lunch yesterday, but you can remember back 17 years ago or 20 years ago exactly what happened.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
You can remember things that happen in practices because that little piece of your life is different, and little things that are different make a memory. And I always tell my students that too. Do something different, you'll remember it. I mean, if you do the same thing all the time, you don't. But coaching was different. Every team was different. Every place was different, and so it was nice.
Tell me about your children.
So I have 2 children, Nathan and Sarah. Nathan is 26. He's running his own landscape company right now. He's been very independent his whole life. He's pretty much been his own employer since high school. He would cut grass, and he built it up into this company. And he's doing pretty well. I'm real proud of him. He's able to call people up on the phone, get a hold of people, quote jobs, and roll with that. So it's nice to see him do that, as opposed to what his mom and dad did, being teachers.
Sure.
It's a whole different world. So he's not being mentored by me in that regard. He's kind of learning as he goes.
Out on his own.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my daughter Sarah just graduated from Central Michigan University, and just last week she accepted a job to go for a 3-month stint in Washington doing what I would have always loved to do. It's going to be a Chinook salmon study on the Columbia River. She's going to help a research team, study the migration, I believe. And for 3 months they monitor, they tag them, they check them for health, or I guess the whole thing. And then in December, that'll wind down and she'll come back home. But she's going to do some of these seasonal jobs until she gets to the point where she can get her full-time job in the wildlife conservation ecology.
So is that like a federal job?
This is actually close. It could be probably federally funded, but it's through the Washington Department of Fish and Game. I'm not sure it's the correct title, but
sure.
It's like their DNR.
Sure.
And so it's a government program, it's state-run, but probably federally funded because it's salmon, and they're such an important source to the, obviously the whole country, but the West Coast.
And you're a big fisherman as well?
That's interesting. I really enjoy hunting
yes.
and hiking, camping, and outdoor, hobbies, but I'm not much of a fisherman.
Okay.
And people have asked me, you're a hunter and a fisherman.
I knew you're a hunter, but yeah.
And I've fished in some really cool spots. I've been very lucky. My dad took me to northern Ontario when I was a kid. I've been in the Everglades fishing and Alaska fishing, but my primary thing is on the land. And so I've tried to expand my fishing horizons, but I'm much more of an outdoorsman on land.
The interesting thing about that type of scenario that I find interesting is I'm not into fishing or hunting, but I certainly respect all that goes into it. It's just like your daughter doing the job of finding out where these fish migrate from and to,
yep.
and how, and I'm guessing that it's all about making sure that they don't get fished out and that they continue to thrive in their environment, so there will always
yep.
be those fish.
We want it to be sustainable,
yeah.
So learning all that's important. So yeah, that knowledge of, predict what they can do in the future. So yes, I'm very proud of her that way. It's sustainable use of resources
sure.
is important. Same thing I do when I hunt deer, rabbits, same kind of thing.
So tell me about your hunting.
Well, that's been a passion since my dad, I was raised in a small town. And to be honest, back then there wasn't a whole lot to do. When you have
sure.
3 TV channels and most of them are fuzzy, you can't watch TV, you go out and pheasant hunt, exactly.
Pheasant hunting or squirrel hunting back when you were a teenager, right?
Yep, rabbit hunt, all of that, because there weren't very many deer back then.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, the deer numbers were far fewer than they are now, and there were no turkeys. There's no such thing as a turkey in the Thumb of Michigan. They just
okay.
didn't exist. So we started getting outside, and it was a lot of fun, going outside and seeing new things. And so that's grown now to where I have the ability to now, that I'm retired, go in the fall out west elk hunting. Like my boy and I are going to go to New Mexico. I'm going to be his helper. He's got the tag, and I'll be going out in the mountains of New Mexico. I've been in Colorado, Washington, Oregon. I've been very lucky that way. So it's a passion of mine because I think opposed to fishing, you can see in 3D what's going on. And in fishing, I don't see what's happening.
Below the surface, right.
I really do. I think the visual part of it really matters to me. I like seeing things happen. It's kind of like your own little slow TV screen as things go on. I tried to teach that when I was with kids too, to give them another, in that regard, I try to take the idea of I want to expose kids to things that I do like this because it's all part of science.
Sure.
Like you said, sustainability. So I try to expose kids to that and talk about that because a lot of kids gravitated to that. And it was another way to make a connection with some incredible kids,
So now with the hunting, say with white-tailed deer, not to pin you to a number, but I'm guessing there are more white-tailed deer in southeast Michigan today than there were generations ago?
Oh, it's just unbelievable. I mean, the deer numbers right now are very healthy. In some spots, they exceed what they probably should be having right now. But yeah, it's so much different. And people now are to the point where they don't shoot just any buck.
Sure.
Most guys shoot a bigger one.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, you were lucky to see a deer,
okay.
let alone a deer that had horns and was legal. And so you shot the first one you saw,
right.
you know what I mean? And you were so proud of that. And you still are. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if someone wants to shoot a deer that's smaller, but the numbers are there where you can be more selective and delay the end of your season because when you tag out, you're done.
You're done. So now, will there be more doe permits in the next couple of years, do you think, based upon the population growing?
Right now it's pretty liberal. You
okay.
can shoot. I forget they change every year, so they do. Sure. They fluctuate all the time. But the number of does you can shoot if you wanted to, I gotta believe it might be up to 5 or 10
okay.
this year, as long as you want to buy the tag.
Okay.
And there's no way I can use that much venison, so
right.
I wouldn't do that. But it's a great way to manage a population. So if you have a need for it, I'd highly recommend it.
Okay. So now you retired out of East China Public Schools 6 years ago?
6 years ago.
And you're not sitting idle, and you're not just hunting.
Nope.
Well, tell us what you're
still
doing.
working. So I work for the Michigan Education Association, and so I'm still related to the educational field. I represent paraprofessionals, secretaries, custodial groups, and teachers, of course, in Livonia and in Trenton, and a group of preschools in Southwest Detroit. And so I'm still involved in the day-to-day function of schools. I mean, now I work all summer long, dealing with human resources directors and finance directors
Sure.
and superintendents, but I am the voice for, which is nice, is Labor Day just passed us by, for the organized workers of those districts, and so that we can take and make sure that everything's going as best it possibly can, that they get a fair contract, they're paid appropriately, and things are getting better. So I really enjoy that part of it.
Now, did that come about before you retired or after you retired?
They were simultaneous.
Okay.
I was looking to make a move, and I'd been trying to work with the MEA because I was a union president when I was at East China for several years, and my job is very much like being a union president, like every day.
Sure.
I'm work with, it's the same kind of political
Concept,
situation,
yeah.
the concept, exactly. Advocacy for membership, dealing with little issues as they pop up or big issues as they pop up. So I like that, and I didn't realize I liked it either. You kind of fall into it because it goes back to the coaching. I coached and loved it until my kids were old enough to participate, and then I couldn't give all my time to some other children, which I really missed, and I filled the time with doing union activities because it didn't take as much time, but it still gave me that little extra outside the job that kind of fueled the passion.
Okay. Is there a number of constituents that fall under your realm?
Yeah, it's staggering almost. When I go from, I look at the little town that I grew up in with,
Yes.
42 kids in a class, and there may have been 25 teachers maybe 30 teachers in the PEC system. Where now, just Livonia alone, there are over 950 teachers under the teacher contract.
Sure.
250 plus paraprofessionals, 80 secretaries, and my custodial maintenance supervisors, there's 40 plus of those. And so the scale.
It is crazy.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It changes so much. So.
Okay. Okay. Any defining moments as a teacher that come up to your mind?
I guess the biggest thing is when you see a kid after the fact and you talk to them and you hear something you didn't know. It's like, I had a really bad day, and you were sympathetic to that, and you listened to what I had to say, and I appreciate that. And then I behaved in class, and you hear these stories after the fact. And if you would have known back then, you would have said, well, I would have done that more often. But it's just who you are.
Right. What you do.
But the great teachers I work with are all that way. They really have to take in the kid as a whole when you teach them.
Sure.
And they behave better. But one of the best ever in East China, Keitha Knuth, her quote was, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care."
Yes.
And once you did that, once you realized that's the truth, then, so to answer your question, once they realized how much you cared, and you come back and you hear from them later, and you tell them, they tell you how their life's going and the impact you had in that, that's the thing that
Right.
reminds you that you chose okay. You didn't get rich doing the job.
The thing that comes up time and time again when I talk to people that are in the teaching profession, and it came up in my discussion with Chief Heslop, was that when all is said and done, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, classroom, theater, band, whatever it might be, it really is to make these children into young adults and make them be better young adults and better adults. And my tilt to it is so that they don't have to deal with Chief Heslop's line of work.
Exactly. I mean, what a great guy there. I mean,
Right.
he's been in Marine City the whole time I was there as well, and a great guy and a great chief. He's exactly right. You want to help them not make some of the mistakes you
Right.
made. And you give them some advice that they might take, they might not take. You hope it's good advice, but
Right.
you're exactly right. You want to do something positive. My job was never to make my classroom any other place, anything other than a safe place where they could come in and just be yourself. I
Right.
accept you for who you are.
Yep.
And I didn't realize I was that person when I was in high school. Then you have to take people for who they are, and life's better that way.
Yep. Yep. Well, thank you for coming by, Eric. We will look forward to seeing you on the sidelines at maybe some games here in the
Oh, it's nice to go
East
back and
China
see
area.
everybody. I miss the area.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to recommend anybody, the phone number's on the screen, 586-707-5811, and nominate anybody you wish to have sitting across the table and have a discussion like this. Until next time, we'll see you. Thank you.